Hello, everybody. We are very delighted to be here this morning. I'm Lisa Morrison, my partner in crime here.
I'm Deirdre McKenna.
And just going to introduce, there's a lot of you in the room, and I'm sorry that we can't see all of you. That's the problem when you're sharing the screen here. But very conscious that you're all out there. And I guess just to say before we even get started that this session together is really just an invitation to talk about the issue of suicide, self-harm and safety planning. It is just a conversation. This is not in formal training or anything like that. So I guess just to be clear on that. Also, just an invitation for all of us. I know Deirdre and I very much welcome you all here. We're coming here with both our personal and our professional experience around these subjects. And I guess for me, as somebody who's struggled with suicidal thoughts and self-harm since my teenage years, and only really in recent years have been getting the help I've needed around that, it's particularly heartwarming, I suppose, that you've all taken your time. You know, I know everybody is so busy to come along, and even though we can't see each other across all the screens, I hope that we're all offering out welcome while we're together in this space for this conversation. I would invite you just to think about practicing self-focus and care. Our heads can be very, very busy with lots of different things going on, but you know, this is a sensitive topic. There's not going to be any big issues or disclosures or anything like that. So not about anticipating that, but, you know, we are talking about serious, sensitive issues, and do just be mindful, you know, what that attending to our own inner teachers, being aware of what might be coming up for me in this, you know, in our experiences. We all have friends in our work, in our communities, who perhaps have been impacted in some way by these issues. And we never know sometimes in conversation what could rise up in us. And just to be okay with that, but to take care. If you need to go and grab a cup of water or a cup of coffee or move around, or just think, do you know what, I need a break here, please just do what you need during the session, and to be mindful also afterwards and this evening as we go back into busy things, just what might be going on for you. I also always invite people to practice that both and thinking. Sometimes maybe we're hearing something for the first time or something new that doesn't sit with our experience, and that's quite okay. But holding sometimes many things at once, and just being open and curious to hearing other ways can be really useful. So you're very, very welcome here with us. In terms of an overview, just so that you know what the time is going to look like, Deirdre is going to start us off with talking about, well, what do we actually mean by being with people in distress? What do we mean by distress? What do we mean by being with? And then also bringing in professional context around that. I'm then going to do just an educational piece talking about suicide and self-harm, just some facts, some myths, some barriers to talking about it. And then you'll see that Deirdre and I are in the room together here, because what this is, why we're calling it a conversation, is that this is about a conversation. Safety planning is about a conversation. It is relational. And so we will, at that point, actually just talk through safety planning with you, our experience of that as a conversation. We'll finish it with just a few key takeaways. And if there's any questions, any feedback at the end, we will leave a few minutes for that as well. Okay. So I'm going to hand over to Deirdre.
Thank you, and good afternoon. Many of you who don't know me, I am a social worker by background, but the reason I'm here at all is because of my friendship with Lisa and all that I have learned through this friendship, rather than any time that I would have worked in mental health services, because I never did. So because I didn't have any experience or practice experience in mental health, you know, distress to me, I wasn't even sure that there was a particular meaning to it. But there is a dictionary definition, and it is about anguish, extreme anguish, grief, pain or suffering of the body or mind. And that is the understanding or the definition that is used in mental health. So it is about extreme anguish, extreme suffering. So for me, distress meant in my, sorry, I just need to go back. So for me, what distress meant for me was maybe somebody being really upset. So I would have used that word, I suppose, willy-nilly. And if you think of a continuum of upset, feeling a bit upset about something, whether it's been late for an appointment or a missed appointment, right through on that continuum to distress, as is just understood, as I defined it for you there, there is a world of experience and feeling. So I do have, even though I didn't work in mental health, that practice area, I do have personal experience of being with people who are even very upset or, you know, really grief-stricken. And I would have come across that very often in specialist palliative care, which is my background. So for me, coming to understand through my friendship with Lisa about distress and this extreme anguish, I was able to take something of my own personal experience about how to be with someone who is very upset. I was able to take some of that intuitive responses, but also learned responses, and apply them then in this other context. So that is part of the invitation, I suppose, of this afternoon. You know, what we can, our starting point isn't from zero. We all have personal experience that we can build on and amplify. So then what do we mean by being with? And I think these pictures speak 1,000 words, but I suppose being with speaks particularly about a type of relationship, a relationship of equals. And being with people compassionately, that is a key requirement, if you like, in order that they are able, that person in distress is able to feel heard, to feel seen, and to be help soothed. And then as a social worker, or many of you maybe are social care workers, we are a regulated service, and our standards of conduct and practice are underpinned by values. Values that require us, not suggest or invite us, require us to be with people in a respectful way that is respectful and mindful of their inherent worth as people, and recognizing the dignity of the person that we are with. And because we are a values-based profession, central to that is the quality of a relationship that we are always trying to aspire to, a relationship that seeks to connect with people. And we do that through our ability to communicate and to communicate well with people. So we are compelled, as I say, professionally, and that helps me in my personal relationships. Because values, my values isn't something I put on in the morning along with my name badge and my lanyard to go out and do no harm. They are core to me, and they influence how I am in whatever aspect of my life. So I wanted to mention this about for some of us, some of you may feel a little like I did before I started to learn so much through my friendship with you, Lisa. Was the very basic for me was about doing no harm. Let me not add to a difficult or challenging situation for someone. And I would have carried a lot of fear. I was fearful because I didn't know, I hadn't worked in the area of mental health. I didn't know anything about how to be with people or what was entailed. And, you know, I would have been caught up in some of the myths that Lisa will debunk for us later on. So I was fearful. I was fearful of the unknown. I was afraid of saying the wrong thing and of making things worse, so that by saying or doing the wrong thing, I would actually escalate a really distressing situation or someone, the level of distress that someone was experiencing. So a safe starting point for me was, let me at least do no harm. And for me, very often it is, I had this sense that it is very difficult to do harm when I am listening to you. So the quality of my listening is a terrific, a good quality of listening is a terrific starting point for any of us. And then this is a quotation from, she was a palliative consultant, Naomi Riemann, who started a center for compassionate medicine in San Francisco. And she talked about this 3 ways or 3 ways of seeing the world, worldviews, of helping, fixing and serving. And she talked about when we help, we see life as weak. When we fix, we see life as broken. But when we serve, we see life as whole. And says that, while fixing and helping may be the work of the ego, because there is something in that for us, service is the work of the soul. And for me, this is a key quotation, if you like, or a context for being with someone who is in distress, being with them compassionately. Because if my disposition with that person, if my stance is, how can I best serve this person? That immediately impacts the power dynamic or any imbalance in a power relationship. If my sense is this person with whom I am sitting is so distressed, how can I best serve? There is no over than or greater than. This then allows for the equality of relationship that is actually very empowering for the person. So how do I best serve? So Lisa, if I asked you in regard to our friendship maybe, some of the things that helped when you were feeling very distressed, and maybe an experience from professionally when you were accessing mental health services that might help put flesh on what we're talking about.
Thanks. What Deirdre is talking about there, particularly around power and equality with the being with, is that stigma is actually still alive and well around mental health. And what I so appreciate and us being able to do this together is Deirdre actually being able to be honest, first of all, about that and say, because sometimes we don't have these conversations because we're afraid to admit that we're thinking this or that, or it might be the wrong thing, or we might use the wrong language. And yet for me, and in the work that I do training and consultancy work around trauma-informed care, around suicide prevention and things. We really need to be opening up these conversations and creating safe spaces where, because how do we ever address attitudes, judgment, stigma if we can't talk about it? So I so appreciate that. And I think my experience, and it really is literally a lifetime in mental health services, has been one of huge inequality in terms of power, and that you do feel less than, less competent, less able, less trustworthy, you know, and those things actually still sit in me and can rise up on occasion, that I think, gosh, that is so deeply entrenched in my experiences. So I guess in terms of what has been so helpful, that is the first thing in our relationship, with that being with, is what Deirdre is saying. We can do little harm if we listen. It seems so basic, you know, and yet I honestly believe we need to get back to basics, because for all of us, being heard, being listened to, not somebody jumping in with solutions, is the first point of call in any good communication or relationship. So that has been really important, as well as the fact that, for example, I run my own business now, and I still have struggles. We're going to talk about my safety plan. And this whole idea, what Deirdre is able to do with that is, I suppose it's debunking some of those myths, or what we think people are like. It's actually saying, you know, it's okay for you to be experiencing this, but that doesn't diminish me in any way. It doesn't diminish my competence, my ability to do my work, me being a mother, all those kind of things. And that's really important to me in terms of being able to share or talk about, or ask for help when I need it, is knowing that I'm not going to be diminished in that experience. You know, who I am as a whole person. And this is a part of what I struggle with. I think also just some of the basics, like, you know, tone of voice, slowing down, you know, being measured. And this is also much part of trauma-informed values and principles, which is language we can use, can be bandied about. You know, I think it's really important that we put it into something tangible and practical. And for me, this is what trauma-informed is. It's that slowing down. It's that when you're really, really distressed, you know, I can't always think for any of us, but especially if we're along that continuum, you can't think clearly. You know, the world takes on a completely different shape. So just having somebody who isn't panicking, isn't jumping in, trying to find solutions, because that we can be afraid. This person's feeling despairing. You know, they're thinking of ending their life. They're wanting to self-harm. We need to fix this and sort this out now, because, you know, that's really not helpful. Because in fact, you know, you can close down with that rather than allowing that space. Soothing, you know, reminding me, and this is where we'll talk about the power of safety planning, is Deirdre also knowing what actually helps me when I'm like that, because we're all different. All of us are different and need different things, and different things will work for us. So I think those are, even just being given not in this hot weather, but a blanket, you know, just having some comfort things around when you're really distressed, blanket, a cup of tea with some sugar in it, just somebody actually caring about you, being, you know, and those are all really basic things. It's not having all the answers. And in fact, one of the things which I was thinking about last night is there is something very powerful about somebody not having the answers, because certainly in terms, and I can only speak for this is my experience that I'm talking about as it is in our relationship. But I have done a lot of work with people as well that I know it can be translated out. But it's that thing of, you know, when you've got experiences that people might not know about, somebody jumping in with answers is kind of like saying, you actually don't get this. You know, you actually don't. If you think you can fix what I'm experiencing or what has led to me feeling like this in this situation, actually you haven't heard, and you're not with me because you're not experiencing what that is. And I think that's a really powerful thing that you bring, and that belief. Sometimes we need somebody to hold hope for us. And it's about getting through to the next day. And this is actually evidenced as well, that suicidal thoughts or wanting to self-harm, that will pass. You know, people can be in an acute situation where it feels like you can't see any other way out, but in fact, getting through that, it does ease, you know, and even reassurance with that is so helpful.
And then professionally, you had an experience, do you remember?
Yes. So I actually had an experience back in March, April time, perhaps, because I'm still needing services. And I have a really good relationship with the home treatment team. My safety plan has been a huge part of that and communicating well about that. But we know with staff shortages, I haven't had a psychiatrist for 6 months, and needed help. I needed some extra support. And so I had to, rather than go through somebody that I knew, I had to be assessed in the community mental health team by 2 workers in that team. I was very distressed at the time. I don't understand what I suffer from as mental illness. I understand it as arising from trauma I've experienced in my life. And it's a different way of looking at experiences. And I went in, part of that, I can experience, I can see things and I can hear things that other people can't. That's part of the dissociation and psychosis. So when I'm really dysregulated, which is very distressed, that can all be going on. I went into a room. I nearly didn't ask for extra help because I didn't know who the people were going to be. And I thought people could jump in, detain me, decide I needed to be put in and all choice would be removed. But I went, met with these 2 key workers, and part of what was going on for me was it was really difficult to express what I was thinking, what I was feeling. I was afraid that that choice could be removed from me as well, and I was feeling paranoid. And in the conversation, as the key worker was trying to establish what was going on for me, somebody I didn't know, there was growing frustration because I was battling to articulate that. And at one point she said to me, look, you really need to tell us what's going on here. It was something like that. Tell us what's going on here, you know, because otherwise what are we going to do? Something along those lines. And my thought was, do you know, I am going to be getting out of this room ASAP. I am not sticking around to have a chat to these 2. Fortunately, the other person who was in the room, noticing my distress with that, just said, we really are here. We're just wanting to help Lisa. Know this is really difficult for you. And just in the way that she was, the quiet voice, the reassurance, the take your time, acknowledging that this is difficult. Fortunately, I was then able to, in that process, communicate what was going on, and support was able to be put in place. Yeah. So this is a slide I share in most training that I do, is some of the back to basics. We have so many theories and models and ways of doing things out there at the moment. And I think sometimes really, can we just get back to basics? Reassure. You know, if it's in a professional sense, you hardly know me. Think about being in extreme distress. Think about just when you've maybe been distressed, you know, how vulnerable you can feel with that. Acknowledging that it takes courage for people to talk. Saying, I can't imagine how upsetting or frightening this must be. If you don't know, say you don't know. That's really validating. I hear you. You know, this must feel so hopeless or helpless. Who are we to decide whether somebody should be feeling a certain way or not? And that, of course, is in responding to their words. And even just something as simple as saying, I'm so sorry you're hurting so much. I'm so sorry this is so painful for you. It's something you would say, you know, but as a professional as well, you know, we can say that is, you know, that's heart stuff. That's when we connect. That's that being with somebody. And then also trusting your gut. You know, we've moved so far away into our heads and into models, and sometimes coming back to that heart space, that gut, you know, what is my natural response here? What are the words that I would use? I've put words here in sentences that work for me, but it's really about just taking some time to think about what is it you would say, that conveys these messages. And then that piece that I've spoken about, that we can't and don't need to have all the answers. Services can't provide everything that we need for any of us in many different areas, not just in mental health. And I think sometimes honesty and transparency about that, acknowledging there's a 1.5 year, 2-year waiting list for psychological therapies, whatever it might be, acknowledging the reality of that, whilst also bringing things that we can do.
Yeah. And I think, thank you, Lisa. And I think for me, that's a very safe starting point for me, because I don't know all the models, because that hasn't been my professional practice area. But a safe starting point for me is just, I do care, and demonstrating that. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. But let me ask you, would it be all right, or how would it be if? Because I can't do harm, and it ensures that you, Lisa, are directing. That you are giving as much agency appropriately
So.
as you are able for in that moment. And Lisa talked about choices and making choices. And one of the things that that I, learned when Lisa was very distressed was I needed to reduce the number of choices I was offering. So there would have been times where I had been saying, what about this or this or this or this or this? That was too much. That sometimes is actually so overwhelming. There's just too much choice there. And that what worked much more effectively in order to ensure this equality of relationship and to give Lisa agency, to ensure she had agency, I would say, well, how would it be if we had our dinner now, or we go for a walk now? So to narrow it down, instead of, as I say, offering a plethora of options and choices, because the feeling of that then, Lisa, is that you are allowed to be in charge of what the decision is. And sometimes you would say to me, I can't choose, you choose. But that in itself is agency. That in itself is you having your say.
And that is just such an important point, and I'm glad you brought it up, because that is about, and for people who are traumatized and trauma informed, is all about options and choices and agency. It's feeling like you've got some control when you are feeling so out of control. And it's as much that for professionals coming in, even if you've been doing this for however long, that person, somebody coming in and saying, for example, is it okay if I sit here? Just being mindful that when people are distressed, our perception, our feeling of safety, all of that is impacted. For any of us, actually, this is relevant across the spectrum, but it becomes more and more important, I think, the further down we go. Yeah. So.
Okay.
So I'm just going to do the bit now, just a bit of the educational piece. I'm not going to go into this documentation. There are resources at the end of this slide with links to all of this, but just to say that this is relevant documentation to this conversation and what's happening regionally, across Northern Ireland. So just to be aware of these, but I'm not going to be talking about those in this session. Just some useful information, and that's a lovely quote coming from South Africa. Nelson Mandela talks about education being the most powerful weapon. And I think, sorry, that's it's with clickers and things here. And I think that's why part of this is an educational piece as well. I have been an independent trainer with an organization that I will reference, and you will see their work at the end here. So this isn't just my lived experience as well. This is something, that I'm able to teach on and bring to. So just some basics to go through. It's not all of it. There's too much to talk about, and it's also not okay if we're not face to face and there can't be a backwards and forwards, you know, to talk about some issues. And what I should have said earlier as well is that if you have logged on at home, you know, when we're talking about some of this or around the safety planning as well, just to be mindful if there are children around or anybody coming in, that you do just mute, that the conversation is appropriate for adults. So just some information, you know, one of the beliefs is that suicide is inevitable, that it can't be prevented. You know, that has been evidenced that that is not true. But I would also invite you to think about, for people who have been bereaved by suicide, you know, that's really quite a difficult thing to even think about for people, because there is so much guilt. It is a traumatic death, you know, and wondering, why didn't I know? Why didn't I spot that? What didn't I do? You know, and I'm very mindful that some of us in the room will have experienced that for ourselves. So when we say this is an important message to get out, that there are simple things that we each can do, we all can play a role, but also just to be mindful of that other aspect. Also, asking somebody if they're suicidal does not put the idea in their head. A person will either laugh it off, or what it communicates to somebody is, do you know what, I'm actually okay to talk about this. So if you need to, also really important that we are clear with what we're asking about if we are concerned. It's not about saying, oh, are you thinking of doing something stupid? That's not helpful, because that already implies judgment. But to say, are you thinking of ending your life? I'll go on to talk about language. There's different ways to approach that, but being clear when you're asking people. Also, mental health problems alone do not explain why people die by suicide. And we know that the causes are very complex. So it's really not helpful to be sending out messages that somebody has died because X has happened. It's always within a context and far more complex than that. Really important to note, NISRA, the stats and research here show that in the most deprived areas, there's at least twice the suicide rate. The Protect Life 2 strategy is coming to an end. It'll be looking at being renewed. It's up till 2024, I think. It doesn't look at specific interventions for more deprived areas, but we do know that, and that's about social determinants. And I think as a social workforce, there are wider issues here that we should be advocating for around human rights, around equalities, around social justice. Stigma and potential barriers to seeking help. I spoke a bit about that earlier, the stigma around mental health. Also, that suicide and self-harm are selfish. That's a selfish act. We need to start inquiring for ourselves what might be going on for people that they think that death is the way out. You know, and often it's not, and the research tells us this, it's not actually about death. It's about feeling trapped, and how do I get away from, escape, find some relief from the pain that I'm in. Something for me, you know, a terrible shame, in fact, that I held over the years was that not even my children, not even the love for my children was able to help me stop self-harming or stop attempting suicide. And in fact, in my very worst moments, I believed that they would be better off without me. I genuinely believe that, sitting here as a person feeling okay in myself, you know, I can say that I absolutely understand that, you know, being even extremely unwell, would it be better for them than that? But at the time, I genuinely believed that. There's also the idea that suicidal people are weak or attention seeking. We're going to be talking about safety planning specifically around people in mental health services, where this attention seeking thing is language that is used around people. What we do know is that people who self-harm, that I'm bringing this in before language comes in, but anyway, that people who self-harm is one of the risk factors to people going on to end their lives. And of course, thinking about this, barriers to seeking help. some of the campaigns out there, the anti-stigma campaigns, I can be quite challenged by in some ways, because the 5 steps when you're really in a difficult place and when you have severe long-term issues can be very difficult just to engage in doing these things, as well as reaching out, and not just for people in services. And we need to start thinking about, how do we reach into people? How do we become the people, whether it's in our teams at work, whether it's in our communities, in our families, where people know that it's okay to talk about when we're feeling stressed, when we're feeling challenged, when we're feeling distressed. Worried about what will people think of me. There's shame attached to it. And really interesting, I worked in the Southern Trust Recovery College as the lead peer trainer for a number of years, and I did a lot of work locally and regionally. I would have had a number of conversations with staff across professions, and there's something about me bringing my lived experience to my work that gives people permission to talk about that themselves. And I was struck really by how many professionals approached me with their own stories, either themselves, children, family members, experiences, but that thing of, I can't actually talk about this. And I don't mean talking about it as part of your work, but saying that you need help, or saying that this is an experience because of stigma attached to that, being seen as less competent, and especially, funnily enough, for social workers. Dealing in maybe high-risk decision-making, safeguarding issues. What does that say about me? So there's stigma to be addressed across the board. I should be able to sort this out on my own is another thing. And for those of us who've been in crisis before and have had experiences where we felt invalidated, I have been to the emergency department where I wasn't given anesthetic, where my dignity and privacy was not honored, respected, where people have sent me away with a lifeline card, and that can make it difficult to reach out and ask for help again. So language, I've covered some of the language, but just useful for people. Sometimes we get confused. Well, isn't suicide self-harm? Yes, it is, but there can also be self-harm without the intention to die. One can cross over and become another, can lead into that. I'm not going to go into self-harm. I hope to develop training around that, because it's been so much part of my experience and a way that I've managed really very difficult experiences in my life. It's helped me regulate and manage, but there are many reasons people self-harm. Fobbing it off with the sentence of it's a useful coping mechanism really actually doesn't get to the heart of it, the distress around it, the distress dealing with it, and the feelings associated with it. Also, in terms of language, we no longer say committed suicide. It used to be a crime, and in fact, until relatively recently, it's not a crime. That's why we don't use that language. Alternatives are a person tried to end their life, take their own life, attempted suicide. Words to be aware of here that I've put up: repeat offender, revolving door, frequent flyer, the word deliberate self-harm, threatening suicide, a successful suicide. All those words imply judgment, and put shame on the individual experiencing that. So really useful just to be aware of the language that we're using. And when we're talking about these issues, who is listening to us using these words? Because we could have the person sitting next to us in our team where we're working who may be dealing with these challenges in some way or another in their own family or in their community. So really important just to perhaps spend some time reflecting on the language that we use. So just to talk, what is safety planning? It is an evidence-based tool. Findings from a wide range of studies have shown that it has been helpful in getting people through crisis situations where they have been thinking of self-harm or suicide. And it's a tool that helps keep people safe when they are distressed. I've put on a few slides and more. I don't like to confuse things, but it is more than just keeping people safe in the moment, because if we continually going back to safety planning, if people are going back to crisis, needing to use self-harm. Why is that? Safety planning the safety plan can't just be about getting through the now. It needs to also be thinking about, how are we moving out of helping a person out of that place where that feels like an option that they need to use. These resources will be at the end as well. I've referenced Rory O'Connor here. He's a leading suicide expert and researcher. He's written a book called When It Is Darkest. I know people bereaved by suicide have found the book particularly helpful, and it goes into more in-depth about some of these things. But also safety planning is for all of us. The organization, you'll see the safety plan up there. It's just basically to give you an idea, if you don't know what a safety plan is, some of the things that are on a safety plan. Different people have developed different tools, but very similar content is on there. This is a free online resource, safety planning site. It has videos, it's co-produced. The people who deliver this training, it's all accredited. They actually have awards for it. They're a team, a GP, psychiatrists, people with lived experience, but everybody has their own safety plan. They look at it as almost putting on a seatbelt. So thinking about, if I ended up in this position, what of these things on this list would work for me. So it is for everybody, and something, especially if we're working in services, supporting people who are suicidal, even going through the experience of thinking, what might this look like for me, can be useful. Also, there's safety planning, I'll go on, safety planning in response to a crisis and ongoing struggles with self-harm and suicidal thoughts. Safety planning, I suppose useful first of all to say the Regional Towards Zero Suicide program has already, over the last number of years, I was involved in that in the beginning, has been, spread and scale of safety planning that is happening using the Western Trust Safety Plan. I'll show you that. So it is being used. What I would say, however, is safety planning belongs to the person whose safety plan it is, who is in distress. It is a document that is done in collaboration with, and that part about being with people in distress is really important part of that. It isn't owned by a service, so it's not that inpatient or crisis or key workers should be doing safety planning. My safety plan goes with me, whatever service I'm in, and my GP is aware of my safety plan as well as my supporters. It's about my safety plan, but in collaboration with. In an acute crisis, these are just a few facts so we don't get confused when we're talking about my experience, our experience of safety planning. When I'm in acute crisis, immediately threat of harm to self or others, as may be the case, that's about making the situation safe then. That's not a time that we're going to get into options and choices and having long conversations about. That is about ensuring that the person is safe in that moment. We can do a short version of a safety plan at that time as well, but then it's also revisiting and coming back to it in the follow-up when the person is not so distressed. Your brain does go offline, so it'll vary how people can engage at that time, and it's always a choice. Safety planning is about a choice. It's a dynamic document that will grow over time. We'll talk about that. It also, as you pointed out when we were talking about this, for myself, it's a good reminder for me about practical ideas of things that I can do to help myself, but it also is information for professionals, for people supporting others about what actually is this person doing that helps, and what can I invite or encourage them to think of doing at the time. So it's a really useful, practical tool. I think just to show you here that this is the safety plan being used across the trust. This is what I get in services. I've done my own safety plan. It's really important that people are able to add in and put into their safety plan whatever matters to them. But just to give you an idea, my personal plan, the first 2 stages is about making the environment safe. We'll talk about that. Things to distract myself, things to do, how will I get there? people I can identify, I can talk to if things get worse, things other people can do to help me, professionals, contact numbers, emergency contact numbers. And then on the other side of the safety plan, things I enjoy doing, warning signs I may be becoming unwell, things that have helped me in the past. There's goals, hobbies, and things. So this is not here as we're not educating about step-by-step safety planning, but just so that you have an idea for those of you who don't know what it might look like. That is an awful lot of information. So if you need to stand up and shake your arms out or something, have a drink of water, just walk around your room for a few minutes, that's quite okay. So this next section is going to be a conversation with my friend here about safety planning, just to hopefully give you some idea of what that experience is like, and hopefully within that there will be some useful ideas, thoughts for you to consider. I'm just going to read you a poem that I wrote in 2019 that I read at the launch of the Towards Zero Suicide program. And this poem is called Blinded. What did you see when you looked at me? Bandaged, broken, breaking down. Symptoms smothering, suffocating sound. Risk assessed year on year, those boxes ticked. The plans you made, the same each time, which I then went and disobeyed. Repeat offender, that was me. Revolving door, we all could see. Or not. Textbooks teach many truths, they have their place. But I am me and you are you. Did you not see? 100 stories carved upon my skin speak a truth I needed heard. But I'd been labeled to be understood, and a heavy cost was incurred. Not all is as it seems, you know, for me or you. Behind the walls and masks we wear, we're all just human. We all know despair. Before you judge or label me, please make some space and truly see. So we're going to have a wee conversation about safety planning, just to introduce this, you know, and I think a lot of us probably feel like this woman a good bit of the time, especially coming to the summer. That stress, unfortunately, just a bit of lavender or a cup of tea is not enough when you're at the extreme end of distress. I suppose for me, in my time in services, I didn't, in the years I was acutely unwell, I didn't actually have a safety plan. We didn't do safety planning. You would have had a discharge recovery care plan from the inpatient or home treatment teams. And that listed things like, you know, if I was in suicidal or self-harm crisis, it was things like, was I complying with my medication? And protective factors, my children were identified as protective factors. As I've said, you know, I wouldn't have admitted that they weren't because of the shame around that. And we did the same thing over and over again. We never stopped to say, why do I keep harming myself? Why do I keep attempting to take my life? What needs are not being met? And there's a long journey that I went through to get to the place where I'm at now and start learning about all these things. And in fact, what had been going on for me for so long. And safety planning has been a really powerful tool. All the recovery colleges in the trust deliver a course called WRAP, Wellness Recovery Action Plan, which is really useful in terms of helping people as well as staff think about some of the issues in a safety plan, because there was a time when I couldn't have answered some of the questions in them on there. But safety planning has been a tool for me where I felt I've been able to be heard, where it's been a changing, growing document. It has helped see me through crises. It's protected my relationships. It's helped me keep it as much choice and control of my own journey as I can. And that's why I just want to share that when we do it in a meaningful way, it is not another box to be ticked. I know there's so many documentation for staff to have to fill in. This is part of a conversation that should belong in the context of many things. The regional mental health care pathway talks about safety planning and a well-being plan. Safety plan is not a well-being plan, but aspects of well-being are in this. But I thought what would be useful to start this conversation is actually to invite Deirdre, who has been thrown into this, who was thrown into this world almost. And I'm so grateful for that. And that we're able to share with you, because, to bring this to life, her experience, and we will backwards and forwards around that. Yeah.
Thank you, Lisa. Lisa, as I was listening to you just read that poem again, I was just thinking that maybe for a lot of you who are hearing Lisa share something like that for the first time, you can really feel an emotional impact with that. So just maybe, Lisa, just to thank you for sharing it with us, but also maybe we'd like to encourage all of you on the call just to give yourself a minute or two, just to feel the impact of that. The truth of how it is for someone when they are in distress. So thank you for offering us that insight. So as regards safety planning then, I said to you at the outset that I never worked in the area of mental health, but when Lisa asked me, would I be willing to be one of her supporters in her safety planning, I knew nothing about it. And as she started to explain just as she has for you, what safety planning is, I did have a kind of a reference point from my own practice background, which is palliative care, where I know about advanced care planning. And advanced care planning is that piece about people thinking about what is important to me, if I become acutely unwell, even unto death. Where people, when they were able to say, these are some of the things that are really important to me, and about treatment options and about family or who I'd want to be with, and communication and all of that. So I did have a really good reference point, I felt, when Lisa was asking me to be a supporter. So when I understood that, Lisa talked me through, she started her safety plan giving some background on, your history, Lisa, or, what to date, some of the diagnoses that you've had to carry, and so on. So in that document, there were, practical things where Lisa would have said, look, if I'm very distressed, this is some of the things that help me. Please don't sit too close because that can be frightening. Offer me choices, keep me safe. And where I am in acute crisis, or where you can't find me, you are concerned and you can't find me, it's okay for you, for example, to ring the police. And I remember when Lisa and I had that conversation, I was saying, oh, Lisa, I would feel so worried about that, because, you might be really cross that I have phoned the police. You won't be happy, and that could really affect our friendship. And Lisa was explaining to me that, I am giving you my consent now. I recognize that if I am so unwell that I am at risk of ending my life or serious self-harm, I give you my consent now to have the police look for me, find me, and keep me safe. So that was a great safeguard and reassurance for me that I could make those kind of calls in the event of a crisis. Now, obviously, Lisa's first supporter is her husband, Gary. And another part of the safety plan that I found really good was that Lisa recognizes that Gary and I, where we are concerned about your safety, Lisa, are concerned about what's happening, that Gary and I are in communication. So Lisa recognizes that through her safety plan, even though at a time where you are feeling acutely unwell, you might be suspicious of those conversations. We have a reference point where we can say, Lisa, you know, we agreed, we talked about this, that Gary and I, because we care for you, because we love you, that we will be in communication to try and keep you safe. There are phone numbers, there are practical things about who I should contact in hours, out of hours, GP contact, and so on. So those are really good safeguards for me. And the other thing that the safety plan was really helpful for me too, Lisa, was that we were able to agree, if I am very worried about you or very concerned about you, that it is okay for me to go through a series of gentle inquiries or questions about, does Lisa have access to means? So if it's all right with you, Lisa, just to say, so one of the checks that we would do if Lisa was going to stay here, because stay overnight here with me because she was very distressed, would be that I would take the keys out of the doors and that I would keep them with me, so that Lisa wouldn't be able to leave the house without my knowing in the middle of the night or drive off, and sometimes take the car keys. And you aren't happy with that when you're feeling, that isn't nice. But I suppose because of trust, first of all, but also because it's specified in the safety plan, Lisa will agree to that, as I say, even though very reluctantly at times. The other thing, Lisa talked about the safety plan being a dynamic document. And in my experience of it with your safety planning, Lisa, is that after an acute episode, Lisa and I would, in the light of that and our experience of that, we would come back to the safety plan, and you would have changed things. You would have changed things like, for example, the last time you made changes to it, you were saying, I'm going to take away a lot of this background information, because in a crisis, people need to be able to see the information quickly. Also, you would have updated some of the telephone numbers and discovered one of the telephone numbers weren't there. But what I really, really love about the safety plan, and Lisa, your safety plan, Lisa, and that it was done in collaboration with all of your support. What I really love about it is I see Lisa in it. I see a person, and a good, well thought through safety plan that's very difficult to do in crisis, and there's no doubt about that, because the person doesn't have the wherewithal. But that's why it's so important to revisit it when the person is out of that acute crisis. The safety plan helps me see you in the midst of this extreme distress.
And if I can come in there, thanks for that. Just what Deirdre is saying, taking that chunk out of my initial safety plan, that chunk was in there because I hadn't felt heard for so many years. And it was really important for me to have an explanation of what I've experienced, restrictive practice I've experienced, why I would be afraid of hospital, all those things that mattered to me, that was in my plan. I still have some of that background because part of, I mean, we're sitting here having a conversation, and I think it wouldn't be, I think it can be difficult to grasp that I go out, I run my own business, I do public speaking, and yet I still have times of quite extreme distress. I'm recovering from trauma that wasn't treated over a lifetime, really. And part of my work is about challenging how we view, that there's different ways of viewing people who are in real distress. That's part of my work, which is why I share about it as well. But for me, it was really important to have that and to say, because we get labeled, we label people. And in fact, I did a literature review as part of my postgraduate certificate with social workers, looking at approved social workers who do the detention process, with working with people, and how social workers recognize that social determinants are so often, trauma and social determinants, inequalities are so often the causes of why people are distressed, you know, and yet we're coming in a very medicalized system still, that treats it, you know, this as a problem, something wrong within you as an individual. So people understanding what I suffer from, in my words, and how that affects me, and when I'm distressed, what that looks like, and what's helpful and not in that, is part of me taking my voice back, and part of saying, I'm more than this, but I also need you to hear that. Another thing with safety planning, that access to means, that is really important part of it, because it is one of the safeguards in terms of actually keeping the person safe. Do they have access to tablets? What are they thinking of in terms of ending their life, if they have said that they're suicidal? You know, it is, we can't remove everything. You know, it's not about that. But it is, one of the things is that you can act in the moment where you can't see anything else. There doesn't seem to be another option. It's about trying to remove anything that can see a person through until they can think in another way.
Yeah. Another really important part of the safety planning and the conversation we had in developing the safety plan, which is yours, Lisa, for me, is about boundaries and about self-care. So part of that conversation that Lisa and I would have, and it is something that we would have often, or at least on an ongoing basis, is about, for me to be very clear about what I am able for as a supporter, and what I'm not able for. So, and that can change over at times as well. So for example, if I'm well slept, and you know, I have been taking care of myself, I am in a much stronger position to be able to do what we describe in relation to listen well and to be with someone compassionately. If I am not in good form and shape myself, it is much more difficult for me to hear, to listen, and to have the emotional wherewithal to be able to be present in a wholesome way with someone. So, and that's important for us personally in our own lives, but also professionally, for us to say, how am I doing? Or what do I need to do in order that I can turn up in as wholesome a way with this person as possible? And the boundary pieces can be difficult conversations for any of us to have with another, because it can feel almost as if we are, you know, compartmentalizing something. So for Lisa and I, as friends, you know, and me introducing an idea of boundary can feel like, hang on a minute, friends don't do this. You know, is there a part of me that's okay, but another part of me that, you know, that isn't okay? But actually, boundaries are one of the most respectful things that I can do for Lisa, because it says, you know, I care for you enough not to turn up half-hearted with permeable boundaries leaking all over the place, and potentially doing harm. I care for you enough to be able to say, no, I won't be over this evening, or we won't meet this evening because I've had whatever's going on in my life, just I have a wee bit of regrouping to do for myself. That is a very honest and respectful communication. That if you think about it, even though that too has felt hard at times, Lisa, it is, when we talk about it, there, it is a recognition that I value you enough to be honest about how I am and how available I can be. So I wanted to add that in for all of us. And as I say, that is important personally, but also professionally.
Yeah, and I think professionally speaking too, I put in the word human boundaries there, because boundaries change over time with where the person is at, and depending on the two individuals together. So even a professional, personal, that is about figuring out, and boundaries are just as important for me. What is okay for Deirdre to talk about, or to, it's very much a two-way thing, but something that has struck me on a few occasions still, despite, my work and where I'm at today, is how that rises up in me, that when you've been in a system and in a service, that you somehow do become a bit like, you're over there and we don't want to be too close to you. And I've had it with my therapist, with my trauma therapist. She brought me a plant from her home once. And it was like, is she actually daring to bring something of herself into my space that I will somehow, and it comes to me still. It's deeply embedded in when you have been othered and you've been seen as less trustworthy and, all those kind of things. It's really important to keep the person and the human being at the heart of these interactions, even within a professional context, and to offer that choice and autonomy. Sometimes as well, I think on a professional level, professionals can come in and say, this is another thing I've got to do. This is going to take time, this listening malarkey, this being with, and all of that. I mean, trauma-informed, the research around that and bringing those values can de-escalate a situation and actually helps open up communication in a way that things can be resolved in a much more helpful, healthy manner as well. I know everybody's stretched with things, but it really is about a relationship. It's about building trust. Also, some of the things on a safety plan, I couldn't have filled in at one point. I didn't know what things were that soothed me. I wasn't even taught those things. In fact, the years I spent as an inpatient on one-to-one obs, we're just learning some basic things like breathing, journaling, things like that. We didn't do that. So sometimes people are coming in and it is about identifying, there's a gap here. We need to support this person and work together to build skills around this, supports around that. What's not being addressed? What are we not looking at that needs done? And then with supporters as well. I mean, there was a time, sorry, I just need a sip. Too much talking over an hour and a half. There was a time for 5 years I was separated from my family. I'd lost my job. My supporter was my key worker and the person at the end of a helpline. And that makes me quite sad in a way, to even say and think that that's what my life was at the time, that I would have taken a taxi to the inpatient unit. But that is the reality for some people, and especially those of us who are perhaps have been more on the margin. I'm a very respectable mad these days, showing up here, that Deirdre doesn't like me using the word mad, but anyway, sometimes it is like that. But, there was a me who was very much on the margins and didn't know a lot of these things. And we need to be supporting and working with people to develop their networks, their structures, because then we're starting to address causes as well and things.
Lisa, I'd love to just add one more thing before we move on to key messages, and then it'll be lovely just to give people a chance to even to make a comment or something. And the one other thing I'd like to add, this is, you know, at the risk of information overload and experience overload here, you're very good, so many of you to still be with us, is like one of the things that the person in distress does not need is for me to come in a flap, alarmed, or whatever version of flap and alarmed I present with. So for example, I remember, do you remember, would it be all right if I mentioned the poached egg, what was happening? Not about the poached egg, but would that be all right? So one of the things I remember was, you know, people are well-intentioned, really well-intentioned. And during one of the admissions you had, Lisa, I was with Lisa, I accompanied her, and you know, this was the first time for me to be in the inpatient unit during an admission, and there was Lisa and I, and then there were 3 staff, one of whom was a student, so she was standing open-eyed because she was learning with this, and then there were 2 nurses, and one of them was sitting down, you know, just that lovely stance, you know, sitting down, comfortable in a chair. I was sitting beside Lisa, and then the other nurse was busy doing some of the other things that need to happen at the point of admission, which is some of those OBS that are taken, blood pressure, pulse, and so on. So while part of this was all very soft and conversational, there was this hive of activity going on here with straps on your arm, and then press that and take that and let me try this. You know, and I was dizzy, and I wasn't being admitted, but I was trying to keep up. I'm really alarmed for you. And the other thing was, and we laugh at this, was I knew Lisa hadn't eaten, and they very kindly, the staff who was sitting in the chair very kindly says, and you know, would you like something to eat? And I said, gosh, I think a wee poached egg would be lovely. Lisa was telling me afterwards that, you know, that doesn't happen. There isn't the wherewithal to poach an egg. But anyway, so that's just a quick kind of vignette into the flap and the busyness that can actually cause stress and alarm. So Lisa, will we do takeaways and then we'll stop sharing?
Right. Thanks for that, Deirdre. For those of you who have no experience of inpatient wards, a poached egg seems, won't you use that? The clicker's not working.
Oh dear.
Being offered poached eggs when you can't even make your own cup of tea. Let's see.
No, it's not. So
we've frozen. It's because we've been talking too much. I'll just go over it here. There we go. Key takeaways. So the key message: safety planning is for everyone. That stayingsafe.net site is in the resources section, as well as a 20-minute online suicide awareness training that you can do with the Zero Suicide Alliance. So there are some resources there. There's Deirdre and I've made videos on collaborative safety planning. Links on that are all in the reference section, so do take a look at that. Just to go back and think about myth, stigma, and language, this importance of self-awareness. How am I when I'm showing up? That taking a breath, having a sip of water, you know, lowering tone of voice, all those kind of things. The vital importance, if we do nothing else, if we are with people, we're doing something significant. Remembering to keep the person centered. We are more than, this is not another form to be filled in. This is a powerful tool. It's a conversation. It's about relationships. And what we didn't say is that if people have identified supporters or things that can help, those people need to have agreed to that. And that conversation needs to be had. It's not an option of, we don't do that if it's in the safety plan. I know that seems obvious, but it is something that comes up. And remembering about carers and supporters' roles, we can use the issue of confidentiality, in fact, to keep people out rather than finding ways to involve and engage. We're in the context of our lives. Remembering that making the environment safe is really essential, and agreeing that plan, thinking through barriers, that this is a dynamic document. and that the Wellness Recovery Action Plan run in each of the colleges is a really useful, I think, thing to be engaged with or to do in terms of helping people have those conversations. And then just to finish with really is this quote. I talk a lot about how we are with people, trauma-informed values, and that is about how we are with people, that it actually really does matter. You know, it is a horrible place to feel that you're invisible, that you're not even a person. And on my website, I've got this quote, change begins with us, one relationship at a time, because as much as there's so many layers of issues and things that need to be addressed, what we do have control over is that one interaction that we're going to have with somebody today, whoever that somebody is. And some days we're better than other days, depending on all those factors. But yes, so many of the things across my experiences have been those small acts of kindness, those people being able to be with, to listen, to hear, and to validate. And I'm so grateful for people in my life today, like Deirdre, and people who've worked with me in services, the home treatment crisis response, who've respected my safety plan, respected my wishes, worked with me on that. You know, that's about equality. That's about seeing people as people. And that's about things that we can do without a lot of fanfare and whatever. So, yeah, thank you for your time.